craft beer, premium chocolate, clean streets, and charming brick houses. Belgium has learned how to sell its image well, and the world has bought it. But this perfect facade hides deep cracks. Behind the historic buildings and the headquarters of the European Union lies a divided country with a colonial past that still haunts it today. Attacks, prejudice, scandals that have shaken confidence in the justice system, and entire neighborhoods left to decay. Did you know that Belgium went more than 500 days without a government, and that, surprisingly, this wasn't the only time? Or that Europe's biggest child abuse scandal broke out right there, involving politicians, police officers, and even judges? Today, Bello Mundo will show you the other side of the coin, the dark side of Belgium. Number 1. Location and general information. Belgium is located in the heart of Europe. It borders the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, France, and even has access to the North Sea. To give you an idea of its size, it is smaller than the state of Maryland in the United States or the region of Catalonia in Spain, but it is home to almost 12 million people. It is one of the most densely populated countries on the continent. However, the biggest challenge there is internal. Belgium is practically divided in two. In the north is the region of Flanders, where a language similar to Dutch is spoken. In the south is Wallonia, where French is spoken. Between the two is Brussels, the capital. Officially bilingual, but in practice dominated by French. And remember those names? Flanders and Wallonia. They help explain much of the dark side that lies ahead. Even so, Belgium is home to the European Union and NATO, and welcomes more than 20 million tourists a year. But behind the postcards, there are deep cracks. And it is precisely this contrast between the organized image and the internal conflicts that we are going to reveal now. Belgium seems peaceful, but there is much more to it than meets the eye. Number 2. International image. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, when someone mentions Belgium, what comes to mind is almost always a fairy tale setting: chocolate, crispy French fries, craft beers that look more like magic potions. This trio has become almost a calling card for the country, and with good reason. Belgian chocolate is respected around the world. It's not just marketing. Anyone who has tasted brands such as Godiva, Leonidas, or Neuhaus knows that it is serious and delicious. And what about beer? There are over 1,000 different labels. Many of them are made by monks in ancient monasteries. One, Westvleteren, was even considered the best in the world. That says a lot, doesn't it? But that's not all. Pop culture also has its Belgian icons. Tintin, for example, the red-haired reporter we've followed since childhood, always getting into trouble with his faithful dog and that unmistakable look. That's right, folks. Tintin and Snowy were born in Belgium. Even in geopolitics, this nation shines. Brussels is home to NATO, international courts, and important political meetings. Everything there looks like a global city. On social media, there is no shortage of photos of waffles covered in chocolate and whipped cream, impeccable shop windows, clean streets, and charming architecture. It gives the impression of a rich, stable, and safe country. But is the Belgium in the photos the same one experienced by everyone? Spoiler, no. Behind the premium chocolate and award-winning beer, there is a less sweet reality. People squeezed between high rents, poorly structured schools, and neighborhoods where violence has become routine. In other words, the impeccable Belgium of Instagram exists, but it is far from the only one, and that's where the facade begins to crack. Number 3. History. Belgium has one of those stories that starts off complicated. For centuries, the territory was disputed by the Spanish, Austrians, French. It only gained its independence in 1830, when it broke away from the Dutch king and decided to form its own kingdom. But this melting pot of influences left deep marks, cultural, linguistic, and political, that are still evident today. However, the darkest chapter in Belgium's history did not take place within its own territory, but thousands of miles away, in the heart of Africa. Between 1885 and 1908, King Leopold II turned the Congo into a kind of personal farm. It is estimated that up to 13 million Congolese died during the regime of exploitation. The tragedy only gained attention when the atrocities began to leak to the European press. It was the international scandal that forced the transfer of the territory to Belgian control, which, ironically, came to be called formal colonization. Remember Tintin we mentioned earlier? That's right. In his second album, released in 1931, Tintin goes to the Congo, and the comics reflect that absurd Eurocentric view. Africans appear submissive, caricatured, almost childlike. A faithful portrait of the colonial mentality of the time. In the 20th century, Belgium became a battlefield. It was invaded and devastated in both world wars. At times, it collaborated with authoritarian regimes. At others, it resisted bravely. The scars of these conflicts are still visible, both in the architecture and in the collective memory. Number 4. Flanders and Wallonia. Remember that warning at the beginning to remember the names Flanders and Wallonia? Well, now the trouble begins. Belgium is a country that appears united, but inside there is a rift. On one side is Flanders, the northern region, where Dutch is spoken, with a stronger economy, organized cities, and a mentality that values efficiency. On the other side is Wallonia, in the south, where French is spoken, which is more traditional and industrial, but has been suffering from unemployment and economic crisis for decades. In the middle of it all is Brussels, officially bilingual, but with a French-speaking majority, surrounded by Flemish municipalities that would rather not remember that fact. Just imagine the confusion. But it gets worse. In addition to the regions, the country also has communities separated by language. This has created a political system so complex that even the Belgians themselves don't quite understand it. There are 6 governments operating at the same time, each with its own rules. In practice, it's 2 worlds within one country. The press is divided. So is TV. There are schools, universities, and even soccer teams that practically ignore the other half of the country. Each side lives its own reality. The Guardian has called it linguistic apartheid, and that's no exaggeration. To give you an idea of the mess, in 2010, Belgium went 541 days without forming a federal government. Literally, more than a year and a half of political deadlock. No party was able to unite the interests. On the outside, Belgium is all smiles, but on the inside, it's almost a country with 2 souls in a Cold War. Number 5. Social inequality. When we think of rich, developed countries, we immediately imagine that everything works, that everyone lives well, that inequality does not exist. But if we look a little closer, we realize that not everything is rosy, and Belgium is proof of that. Yes, the country has one of the highest development indices in the world, generous social assistance, public schools, efficient hospitals, at least on paper. Because in practice, the gap between rich and poor is much wider than it seems. According to the National Bank of Belgium, the richest 10% account for more than half of the country's wealth, 56% to be exact. The poorest, 50%, on the other hand, account for just over 8%. The numbers simply don't add up. And this inequality is not hidden. It is visible on the streets, in homes, and in services. Suburbs of Brussels, such as Saint-Just-Ten-Noode and Molenbeek, have poverty rates of over 30%. Meanwhile, in northern cities such as Bruges and Leuven, this rate barely exceeds 3%. And it is not just a question of income. The difference is also apparent in the quality of schools, public transportation, and job opportunities. In poorer regions with large immigrant populations, unemployment is chronic and social mobility is almost non-existent. In practice, there are two Belgiums, one that appears in official reports and institutional propaganda, and another that is experienced on a daily basis by those living on the margins. For some, the country is synonymous with comfort and security. For others, it is a minefield of obstacles. Number 6. Insecurity. If there is one thing tourists don't usually see on Belgian postcards, it is fear. But it exists, and it is growing every year. Despite its image as a civilized and peaceful country, Belgium lives with a much less tranquil reality, especially in its largest cities. Brussels, for example, has the highest crime rates in the country. In 2022, more than 4,000 violent robberies were reported in the capital, almost half of all such cases in Belgium. And although the number of homicides varies from year to year, some estimates point to rates of around 10 per 100,000 inhabitants. This is considered high by European standards and helps explain why so many people are always on alert, looking over their shoulders. The feeling of insecurity increased even more after the attacks of 2016, when coordinated attacks hit the airport and subway in Brussels, leaving 32 people dead. Since then, soldiers have been patrolling tourist spots and stations, and the tense atmosphere has never completely disappeared. But it is not only the fear of terrorism that haunts the streets. In recent years, cities such as Antwerp, Liège, and Charleroi have been facing a worrying escalation in violence between gangs linked to drug trafficking. Number 7. Drug trafficking in the port of Antwerp. If insecurity in Antwerp is already a concern on the streets, what happens inside the port reveals an even more complex and much heavier reality. Hidden behind well-kept facades and the elegant rhythm of local commerce, Belgium's main port has become, in recent decades, the largest point of entry for cocaine in all of Europe. The numbers are staggering. In 2022, Belgian police seized almost 110 tons of the substance there alone, which means that 40% of the white powder intercepted on the continent passes through Antwerp. And this is not speculation. It is data confirmed by the authorities. The city has become the preferred route for large Latin American cartels, especially from Colombia and Mexico, which saw it as a strategic entry point, less guarded than the ports of southern Europe, closer to consumer markets, and with logistical loopholes exploited to the fullest. The demand is so absurd that Belgium faces an unusual problem. It no longer has anywhere to burn so many narcotics. Incineration centers have collapsed, and when waste is too precious, it becomes a target. There have been attempts to invade warehouses by heavily armed gangs, trying to rescue confiscated goods. Today, the port is guarded with state-of-the-art technology, drones, cameras with artificial intelligence, and military reinforcements. But even so, trafficking continues, and its effects are increasingly felt by the population. Number 8. Corruption. If you thought that trafficking was enough to tarnish Belgium's image, it's good to know that there's more to the story. Corruption also has a guaranteed place in this picture. Belgium usually ranks well in international integrity rankings. In many, it is among the least corrupt countries in Europe. But less does not mean free. Belgian corruption does not usually erupt in loud scandals, but it is there, operating behind the scenes. Political appointments, favoritism within state-owned companies, contracts with suspicious clauses, and investigations that stall when they run into powerful people. Transparency International itself has warned that despite an independent judiciary on paper, the system often fails due to a lack of structure or interest in going after the most influential people. One of the most emblematic cases was the Augusta scandal in the 90s. It began with the execution of André Kool's former deputy prime minister. The crime, which seemed isolated, revealed a kickback scheme involving the sale of Italian helicopters to the Belgian government. And, according to the investigation, it was allegedly ordered by political allies to cover it all up. But the worst was yet to come. During the same period, the Marc Dutroux case came to light, a criminal with a history of abuse who remained at large. When he was finally arrested, it turned out to be a nightmare. Teenagers held captive, grotesque police failures, evidence disappearing, judges removed from their posts, and an uncomfortable question hanging in the air. Was he really acting alone? The Dutroux case became a brutal symbol. It showed that in Belgium, corruption goes far beyond public money. It can cost lives and expose a system where silence is worth more than justice. Number 9. Immigration and xenophobia. Now we come to the humanitarian and social dilemmas. Have you ever wondered how Belgium deals with foreigners and minorities? The answer is far from positive. Despite being home to institutions that symbolize human rights and inclusion, the country has been facing serious difficulties with the arrival of refugees. In recent years, the Belgian reception system has shown clear signs of collapse. In 2023, the average time to process an asylum application was close to 500 days, and about 15% of applicants had been waiting for more than 2 years for a response. With infrastructure overwhelmed, the government announced that it would only take in families with children, leaving single adults out in the cold. The result was clear. The streets of Brussels were filled with makeshift tents, shelters were overcrowded, and NGOs were trying to do the impossible. This climate of tension paved the way for the growth of xenophobia, especially in Flanders. Extremist, openly anti-immigration parties gained strength and reached almost 18% in the polls. Meanwhile, cases of explicit xenophobia are multiplying. In 2018, the country was shocked by the case of Sandadia, a black student who died after a cruel university initiation ritual. Investigations revealed that those involved belonged to influential families and circulated racist rhetoric in closed groups. Photos of participants wearing white supremacist attire were released, bringing to light the silent but present racism in sectors of the Belgian elite. And these are not isolated incidents. For many immigrants, prejudice is a daily occurrence, from job interviews to classrooms. The local press itself, in some cases, still treats xenophobic statements as controversial opinions, normalizing exclusionary discourse. Number 10. Intolerance. As if all this were not enough, Belgium still faces an increasingly evident problem: the rise of intolerance. In recent years, the country has seen a growing wave of nationalism that has poisoned public debate. These are not isolated cases. There have been protests against Latin American refugees, neo-Nazi pamphlets distributed on public streets, and even schools spray-painted with racist slogans after discussions about sex education. On extremist forums, the number 108 has become code for insults directed at immigrants and the LGBT community, as if prejudice had been given an updated manual. The organization Freedom House has already placed Belgium on alert in its reports, highlighting the rise of xenophobic rhetoric disguised as political opinion. Meanwhile, the government is trying to balance the scales. On the one hand, there are growing calls for more humane policies. On the other, there are increasing cries for benefit cuts, border closures, and mass deportations. At the center of this impasse, the number of asylum applications has surpassed 30,000. People are waiting for a response that is taking too long, or that may never come. Belgium, which once prided itself on being synonymous with hospitality and democracy, now sees its image tarnished. Between the selfies in front of the atomium and the lines of refugees at the screening centers, the country must decide: will it continue to sell the image of a European showcase, or face the cracked reflection that can no longer be hidden? Well, we've come to the end of this journey through the hidden side of Belgium. If you've made it this far, you already know that the Kingdom of Waffles is not free from danger and contradiction. Now it's up to you. What surprised you most in this video? Tell us in the comments. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe here at Bello Mundo, so you don't miss the next dive into another country in the Dark Side series. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.